Today we are covering Mahatma Gandhi. You see him in the middle of the picture on the right and statue of him on the left. Here's a quote of his that's really basic and it's really important. Your beliefs become your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits become your values, and your values become your destiny. Destiny means what's going to happen to you. And it all starts with your beliefs and your thoughts. So Gandhi himself, he was the leader of India's independence movement. England was once called the empire where the sun never set. They owned places all over the world. In Africa, they owned us. We were colonies. And he was the person who led the revolution against them. And he was also the leader of nonviolent civil disobedience that obviously Martin Luther King Jr. is going to use in the civil rights struggle. And he believed in a philosophy called Jainism. So his use of disobedience, you see him giving a speech on the right side. The British were forcing the Indians to pay taxes on salt. Salt's really important in a warm country. Salt is used as a preservative, and they had to pay tax on it. Kind of like the British making us pay tax on tea. And so Gandhi led a salt march. What's a salt march? Well, it was supposed to be 240 miles, and thousands upon thousands of Indian people marched to the ocean, where they literally picked up the salt, which could be found on the beach there, and in that way, they broke the law. Gandhi was known to do this. He was arrested during the Salt March, one of the 13 times that he was arrested, and over 60,000 people from India were arrested. The problem was, a lot of times when Gandhi was in jail, he would fast, which is not to eat. And people were just fascinated that this little tiny man who would be fasting in jail is trying to take on the entire British government. And so he became a celebrity, and sympathy towards him began. Like, people felt bad for him, quite obviously. What he's doing is noble, and now he's in jail, and the British were afraid he could die in jail. And ultimately, when World War II ended, the British left. There was not an overly violent struggle. His nonviolent policy ultimately led the Indian people to get their freedom. So Jainism, and if you look at the picture in the bottom right with it looks like monks with the hoods on, Jainism is not a philosophy that anybody I think today really would adhere to in terms of who's listening to this PowerPoint. A monastic life means in a monastery, and it's a life of fasting and prayer and rejection of stuff, of material possessions, the very things that people want that makes us work our whole lives to get them. They rejected that. Instead, they followed asceticism, which is abstaining from all pleasurable, desirable things. And instead, you're developing your soul or spiritual goals or what have you. Like I said, this is not something that most people would adhere to. And one of the main essences of the philosophy was the care and concern for well-being of everything that exists in the universe and the well-being of every last living thing. Ahimsa, the concept of nonviolence, is one of the main principles of the Jain philosophy. It's toward all living things. They believe that everything is interconnected, and if you hurt something that's alive, you're hurting life itself. So, if you see the ant, you should try not to step on it. It ties in, obviously, with karma and reincarnation. Reincarnation, some beliefs systems have to do with reincarnation into animals or what have you. And karma is doing the right thing or trying not to leave bad karma. That there is some connection between everything that exists. Also, obviously, the concept of vegetarianism would continue here. We talked about these things way back with Pythagoras in the beginning of the year. But Jainists were vegetarians. They believe animals and plants could potentially have souls. I mean, these holy men who would wear sandals on their feet, they literally would wait until the cow had died of natural causes to actually make the sandals. That's how strict their belief process was. One can measure the greatness and the moral progress of a nation by looking at how it treats its animals. I mean, we have the ASPCA in America, which obviously keeps are supposed to keep animals safe and punish those that treat them badly. But we tend to love the cute, cuddly animals. The ones that we eat, maybe not so much, and then there's ones even below that we step on with our feet without even thinking. So, Gandhi had a lot of quotes. He was a leader. He wasn't really a philosopher, but when you look at his quotes, they are definitely philosophical, and they changed many minds. So in my opinion, just like Einstein, he is very valid to speak about in class. First quote of Gandhi: change yourself. You must be the change you want to see in the world. You see that actually around the school. As human beings, our greatness lies not so much in being able to remake the world, that is the myth, as in being able to remake ourselves. I mean, Gandhi was once asked if he had any enemies, and he said, I only have 3 enemies. He said, first, the British government. Second, the Indian people, who were not responding to his nonviolent calls. And third, he said, my biggest of all of my enemies is Mahatma Gandhi. He does not tend to listen to what I have to say. Because ultimately, we have to conquer ourselves in order to change the world. A quote that's not his, but it's related to it, going back to ancient Indian philosophy, Santideva, said, there are lots of sharp rocks in the world. You can either, to protect yourself, cover the whole world in leather, or just wear leather shoes. Which will you do? The story is saying the sharp rocks are people, are situations that we're not going to be able to control. It'd be great to control the whole world by covering leather in it, or covering it with leather, but that's impossible. So we need to wear leather shoes, meaning we need to change ourselves. Number 2, you are in control of your own happiness. Easier said than done, but once this clicks in your head, you will realize, one of his quotes, nobody can hurt me without my permission. Oftentimes, if somebody says something hurtful or mean to me or takes a low blow, after my initial few seconds of defensiveness and hatred, I begin to think, well, glad I know that this is the person I was talking to, so I don't waste any further time. I don't let those words affect me. I will not let anyone walk through my mind with their dirty feet. I often think of that quote of Gandhi. Other people want to bring us down. That's your choice whether or not you listen to them. Number 3, forgive and let go. Forgiveness is one of the hardest things. I'm sure you've heard the quote on the bottom. An eye for an eye only ends up making the whole world blind. That goes back to Hammurabi's code that said, if the punishment for taking out an eye is you lose your eye. That level of punishment, in Gandhi's opinion, does not help. Revenge does not help. The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute of the strong. And the forgiveness, I like to use the Buddhist idea of forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't always about the other person or condoning what they did. It's being smart enough to leave that situation alone and no longer carry that hatred or negative feeling that's obviously going to only affect you. As the Buddha said, being angry is like another person is like carrying around a hot coal, expecting it to burn them. But the hot coal you're going to throw at them, you're the one burning yourself. And the strong will realize, I have to let this go and move on. Number 4, to stay in the present, an ongoing theme. I do not want to foresee the future. I am concerned with taking care of the present. God has given me no control over the moment following. I can approach the concept of staying in the present 10,000 times, and I've taught it probably 50,000 times, and still on a daily basis, I have to remember to get back into that present moment, that flow state, that zone where you don't worry about the past and the future events. You have that stoic philosophy of knowing what you can control, which is only your mindset, and leaving all else alone. Most of the problems that causes problems in the present are not problems of the present, but problems of the mind thinking about the past and the future. Number 5, everyone is human. It is unwise to be too sure of one's own wisdom. It's healthy to be reminded that the strongest might weaken and the wisest might make an error. I think a lot of times we don't want to admit we're wrong. We want to always be perfect, but it's better to be flexible and change your mind than to be rigid and never change your mind on things. You need to sometimes admit, I'm wrong. That's a good point. And not be so committed to be consistent in your views. Better to be hypocritical and change when you realize that the direction you were heading was a wrong direction. I have humility enough, meaning humble enough, to confess my errors and to retrace my steps. Realize that, wow, this is incorrect the way I was thinking, and then change that. That's hard to do because most people are busy protecting who they want everybody to think they are, which is the person who has all of the answers. Number 6, never give up. Much easier said than done, but obviously as someone who took on the entire British Empire, a little tiny man in a loincloth doing hunger marches beat the British Empire. First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. This is obviously the concept of civil disobedience. Back in America during the Civil Rights era, in the 50s and 60s, when young men like John Lewis, who just recently passed away, he would go into the lunch counter of a racist restaurant in the South, in Jim Crow South, and he would order a bowl of soup, knowing he wouldn't be served, knowing people would spit on him and hit him, and he would be arrested. And rather than fighting back, all they wanted to do was have this televised. Because when news media showed what was happening to these people in the South who wanted to order bowls of soup, that's how they won. Public opinion will sway onto oftentimes not the person giving the violence, but the person receiving the violence if it's seen as being unjust. Number 7, to make the most out of your life. Live as if you were to die tomorrow. Learn as if you were to live forever. I like this a lot. It's kind of got the carpe diem thing in there. Most people are so busy in their minds sleepwalking or planning future events or regretting past events that they don't actually realize that the direction your life takes is the direction that you choose to put it in. And so ultimately, to live as if you were to die tomorrow means to make the most out of your life. Number 8, to be compassionate to others. Man becomes great exactly in the degree in which he works for the welfare of his fellow men. I think, generally speaking, we look upon people who are charitable and kind and generous as being a positive. The quote on the right, a lot of times kids don't like. Or he says, interdependence ought to be as much the ideal as self-sufficiency. Man is a social being. Most people agree with the man is a social being, but we as Americans are self-sufficient. We don't want to have to realize that our lives depend on others. I mean, every strawberry you ever eat was picked by hands of another person. And so the interdependence, the bee and the flower, our lives are based upon whether or not truck drivers are going to be driving goods to the grocery store. We are much more connected than we think, even though we want to be selfishly standing on our own. Number 9, be your true self. This is unfortunately something that most people don't do. They do what they be. They become who they want, who they think others want them to be. He said, happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. You're not being manipulative. You're an open book. You're being truthful with others, but more importantly, yourself. And finally, number 10, overcoming our hardships makes us strong. Strength does not come from physical capacity. It comes from an indomitable will, a will that will not quit. So if you try 100 times and you fall down 100 times, that's 100 lessons that you could overcome anything. Some people tend to quit early and become, woe is me, victim mentality. But the realization is our physical capacity, how many bicep curls we can do doesn't mean how strong we are, but how often we get up from setbacks and try to overcome them is the picture of strength. I like this quote. It's not Gandhi quote, but it reminds me of him. The most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat. They've known suffering, they've known struggle, they've known loss, and they have found their way out of the depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, an understanding of life that fills them with compassion and gentleness and a deep loving concern. And here's the part I like about the quote. Beautiful people do not just happen. In other words, overcoming these struggles a lot of times is how we grow strong. In my years of teaching, the kids who are most empathetic, meaning they feel the pain of others, are often those who have felt the most pain themselves. And they understand how that felt within them, and they wish to try to calm that in others. That appreciation, that compassion, that gentleness. It's tough to get that wisdom. It's a high tuition, if you will, because the tuition is all of the suffering you have to go through. But if you can kind of see beyond that and become sunlight for others, that's sort of the key. Everything that has happened or will happen needs to happen in order to make you the person you will become. That's just the general view. Looking at life instead of things that happen to you, looking at it like a curriculum. If you look at the thing in the bottom, it says, School of Hard Knocks, Master of Misfortune. If you go through a lot of tough, terrible, awful events, and you come out stronger because of it, you have understood what life ultimately is. It's not going to go perfect. It's often not going to give us what we want. Can we see our way clear to continuing on and being an asset and sunshine for others? The problem is this. When despite all my best efforts, the lights have gone off in my life, plunging me into the kind of darkness that turns my knees to water, nonetheless, I have not died. The monsters have not dragged me out of my bed and taken me back to their lair. The witches have not turned me into a bat. Instead, I have learned things in the dark that I could never have learned in the light. Things that have saved my life over and over again, so that there is really only one logical conclusion. I need darkness as much as light. Now, this is not a Gandhi quote, but it fits in with his viewpoint that ultimate time, and my favorite line in here, I have learned things in the dark I could never learn in the light. If everything went perfect, you're going to think you're lucky until things go bad, because now you do not have the skills to deal with it. Sometimes the quote-unquote lucky ones are the ones who are, as was said earlier, a master of misfortune. They've gotten through. The obstacle was the path, and they've got over, under, sideways, and they continue on. If we want to reach real peace in this world, we should start educating children. I agree wholeheartedly. There is a quick little Gandhi clip that I would show in class, showing from the film with Ben Kingsley of Gandhi, but being that we don't have that available now, write a journal on your general thoughts on Mahatma Gandhi.